Hey there, Alex Kidman here. Today taking a look at this, the Samsung Galaxy A55. Now, Samsung's Galaxy A phones are their more affordable range. It actually spans quite a price range depending on where you are in the planet. Here in Australia, you start out with something like the $299 Galaxy A05s, the $349 A15, the $499 A25, the $549 A35, and then finally this, the top of Samsung's affordable tree, the $699 Australian Galaxy A55. If the accent didn't give it away, all of those prices are in Australian dollars. Your own currency may vary. Sitting at the top of the range usually means that you get the best features, but of course this is sitting at the top of the mid-range, and Samsung sure doesn't want to cannibalize its Galaxy S sales, so there are some compromises, and what you end up with is a phone that's pretty good in a lot of respects, but not great, and maybe not that competitive in the mid-range space where there's a lot of really good phones to consider. Let's dive into it. So the Galaxy A55 measures in at 161.1 by 77.4 by 8.2 millimeters. It's marginally larger than 2023's Galaxy A54 was, thanks primarily to a boost in screen size up to 6.6 inches. It's still a 120Hz capable panel. It's still quite a nice display panel. And the whole design idea here is meant to evoke thoughts of the pricier premium Galaxy S phones. You're meant to kind of be able to fool people that this might actually be a Galaxy S phone. So you get a glossy glass back, you get metallic fronts. It all looks quite nice. Now, I did find back when I tested the Galaxy A54 that the use of glass made it quite slippery in my hands, and this is still somewhat true of the Galaxy A55. I found it slipping in my hands less. Maybe that's a function of its larger size, but look, honestly, I'd still throw this thing into a case regardless. In terms of controls, the Galaxy A55 puts them on the right-hand side with a small groove beneath the power button, making it a lot easier to locate via pure muscle memory. Nice little touch. Above the power button, you'll find the volume controls, while the top of the phone houses a dual SIM card slot with your typical secondary nano SIM or micro SD choice to make. There's no headphone jack, just a USB-C power and data socket at the bottom. Here in Australia, the Galaxy A55 is only available in two different colours, Awesome Navy and Awesome Lilac, and that's what Samsung's loaned me. And look, I'm not going to say that this light pink is my favourite colour, sure isn't, but it's certainly eye-catching. It's a nice thing to look at. It is worth noting that Samsung internationally appears to produce the Galaxy A55 in two additional colours, ice blue and lemon, and if you want those down under, you're going to have to import. Now, one notable detail, at least according to the massive feedback I got from my video hands-on with the Galaxy A55, are the bezels around its screen. It has bezels. Now, I've got to say, and I've been reviewing phones a long time, these did not strike me as the worst bezels I've ever seen on a phone, but there sure do seem to be a lot of you who just view that as a big deal breaker problem, and if it is, it is. I get it. These things are very much a matter of taste. I didn't find them too problematic, but if you do find them problematic, there's basically nothing you can do about it. They're going to ring around that screen no matter what you do. This isn't a full edge-to-edge kind of screen. If you want that from Samsung, you're basically going to have to spend a bit more money. On the camera front, so the A55 is obviously the successor to the A54, and that was a phone with a 50 megapixel wide, 12 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, and 32 megapixel selfie sensor. The Galaxy A55 is a newer phone, so you might figure it'd bump those specifications up a tad. But you'd be wrong. They're exactly the same specifications, in fact. Wide 50, ultra wide 12, 5 megapixel macro, 32 megapixel selfie sensor. It's real deja vu here, although this is the kind of thing that Samsung has done from time to time with some of its annual updates to phones. The cameras will sometimes stay the same between generations. Samsung's big claim here is that the A55 is better suited to low-light photography than its predecessor was, but honestly, I haven't seen that in my own tests. It's still not a great low-light performer with generally dim shots, with one exception. Now, that one exception are low-light selfies, which are obviously quite important to people, but This has nothing to do with the sensor, basically nothing to do with the phone, actually, in a way. The reason that the low light selfies work a bit better is because Samsung's camera app puts up a big glowing disc in front of your face before it takes the shot. It's literally a screen flash, which you could implement in software all sorts of ways. Works nicely enough, but it's got nothing to do with the phone itself to speak of. On the macro side, that 5 megapixel macro shooter, look, it's okay, but it's a lot of work. And so many of these mid-range and lower-end macros are that way. Sometimes you can get a decent kind of shot, but you've really got to work for it. And if it's a one-of-a-kind shot that you're only going to be able to capture once, you're probably not going to get it based on my own testing. And look, given its $699 price point, what I would have rather seen in that macro lens is some kind of telephoto lens, but no, it's not to be. And to be fair to Samsung, that's still somewhat uncommon at this price point. And instead, you get digital cropping from that primary 50 megapixel sensor at defaults of 2 times, 4 times, and 10 times zoom. That's its maximum zoom range. So how does that look? Well, look, here's some sample photos, and quick advisory, these are not meant to be artistic, wonderful photos. They're very much just showing off what the zoom does. So with the ultra-wide lens shot taken in the Chatswood Library of a sculpture, look, it all looks fine. It's all reasonable enough. If we bounce down to the wide shot, that's fine too, although the difference in color in post-processing, which I'll get back to in a minute, is quite noticeable here. At 2 times, yeah, it's fine, but I mean, that's a very, very basic kind of crop. And even 4 times is sort of workable, but you're starting to see a few issues and artifacts in that particular shot. At 10 times, oof, yeah, that's kind of rough. That's definitely falling apart, not stuff you're really going to want to use in any serious way, and definitely the reason why they've capped it at 10 times, because it's only going to get worse from there. Now, I don't want to create the impression that the A55 has bad cameras. It doesn't. They're actually decent enough at this price range for what they're trying to do. You do get Samsung's tendency, and they've had this for years, to slightly oversaturate colors in post-processing. And look, I get there are a lot of people who love that slightly springy kind of color cast to their photos. And if you like that, great, it's totally here. But still, I'm kind of left in a situation where I think, some of the other cameras in the mid-range even, something like the Pixel 7a, for example, shoot a little better than this. And at $699, you're kind of painfully close to that lower rung of premium where the cameras suddenly get a whole lot better and a whole lot more capable. The A55 is a nice enough camera phone, and Samsung's camera app does make it quite easy to access different modes and take some fun photos. I don't think you'll regret it. It's just not the best you can get at this price point, and that's sort of the story of the A55, as we'll get to as we switch to the question of performance. So in the mid-range, Samsung has long opted for its own Exynos processors rather than the likes of Qualcomm or MediaTek, as you see from many of its competitors. And for the Galaxy A55, that's the Exynos 1480, bolstered with 8GB of RAM and 128GB of onboard storage. Now that's an update over the A54, although only a slight one, jumping up from the Exynos 3080, which is actually what now powers the A35, and only 6GB of RAM. There does appear to be a higher spec 256GB model with either 8 or 12GB of RAM in some markets, but Australia is not one of them. That's not what I've tested with. And of course, the only place that you'll find Exynos branded processors are in Samsung phones. So I didn't really have a CPU frame of reference for the 1480. And that means it's time to jump to comparative benchmarks. Now, I've got all of those in my full written review. They don't tend to present well on YouTube. But the basics here is that at a CPU level, the A55 is okay, but it is bested just slightly by the Pixel 7a and the Motorola Edge 40, both of which you can get at around this price point, and really solidly beaten at a GPU level by those two phones. And what that equates to in real-world use is a phone that's still reasonably capable within the mid-range, but certainly not the fastest you can get. And again, that's a little bit of a problem, I think. Where that problem gets more pronounced, of course, is $699, as I've said already, is kind of just under the premium price that you see some of the older flagships. Like, I haven't seen an S23 that wasn't refurbished at $699, but I have seen S23 FEs at that kind of price. And of course, if you bump back to previous generation flagships, you're still talking something that's got better cameras and in some cases better performance than you'll see out of the A55. So it's definitely worth shopping around. But the A55 does have a few party tricks which push it ahead of some of those older competition phones and even some of the current gen competition mid-range phones. For a start, it's the beneficiary of Samsung's push to provide longer-term security to Samsung phone buyers with 4 years of operating system upgrades and 5 years of security upgrades promised for this phone. So that'll see this phone through to at least Android 18. And that's great. That's great in the mid-range, and it's not super common. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what Google does with the Pixel 8a, which is expected around mid-year. But for now, this definitely has that market really sewn up nicely. Then there's the question of network connectivity. So this is 5G capable, sub-6 only. I would not expect Samsung to break its sub-6 drought here in Australia for a mid-range phone, and my own test results are pretty much identical to every other 5G phone right now. That's so much more network dependent here in Australia than it is a question of phone hardware. If you get those kind of network differences out of it, there's probably something really wrong with the antennas. However, the big selling point here is that while this is dual nano SIM capable, if you don't want to put microSD expansion in there, it's also eSIM capable, and you don't see that in the mid-range all that often either. And eSIM's becoming very popular for things like travel sims because it's a nice easy way just to add a data travel sim while you're traveling overseas. It's a really nice big plus. Now, within the week and a bit of testing time that I've had with it, I've not been able to travel overseas, but it is nice to have this kind of feature if, again, that's important to you. On the battery front, the Samsung Galaxy A55 runs off a 5000 mAh sealed battery, charged via USB-C, and I may as well say that for 99% of all Android phones these days, because pretty much all of them have 5000 mAh batteries. Pretty much all of them are charged via USB-C. Nothing out of the ordinary to see there, but what I was keen to see was how the A55 would compare, because one of the advantages of Exynos processors over Qualcomm ones in the premium space where we've seen it has been in battery life, which sort of makes sense. They're lower power processors in terms of sheer processing grunt, but grunting less means you use less power. I'm not sure that grunt should be the actual metric for processing power, but here we are. To put this to the test, I put the Galaxy A55 through my standard YouTube battery test. 100% battery charge, full brightness, moderate volume for a 1080p video for an hour. And what I look for there is to make sure that a phone has at least 90% when that test is finished. Anything that falls below 90% is a fail, because that's typically a phone that will not last a moderate day's usage. Now, the A55 performed really well there, with 96% of its battery remaining, bested only slightly by the Pixel 7a, but still a really solid, good result here. And it's certainly been borne out in my more day-to-day testing. A day's battery life out of this thing is pretty trivial to get unless you push it particularly hard. Now, the model that Samsung provided to me was not a retail model. It was literally, here's a phone, go test it. So I can't say that there is a charger in the box, although everything that I can see suggests no, there isn't. And the A54 didn't have one. So don't expect that. You will have to bring your own charger to the party for this one. Although you should, I would imagine, get a USB-C cable to go with it. So should you buy the Galaxy A55? Well, look. This is a good mid-range phone with a couple of standout features that genuinely do differentiate it. If you want the security of long-term system upgrades, you want a phone with eSIM capabilities, and you like what Samsung does with One UI, it's actually a pretty decent buy. However, I can't ignore the fact that this is a really crowded market segment, and it's one where there are mid-range competitors that are a little bit more powerful than the A55 is, as well as that constant push of older Android phones becoming cheaper and hitting that roughly $700 price point. So it's well worth shopping around and considering your options before you buy. Anyway, that's my take on the Samsung Galaxy A55. Got any questions? Anything you want to know? Hit me up in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.